the Prime Minister facing intense pressure to scrap the two-child benefit cap. There is now new research by Loughborough University which finds there is a strong correlation between the cap and the UK's rates of child poverty.
But getting rid of it is controversial. It would cost £3.5 billion. It would need to be funded either by spending or welfare cuts elsewhere or by tax rises.
Yes. So, should it be up to the taxpayer to pay for parents who have more than two children? Former Conservative Cabinet Minister David Mellor, who has two children and four grandchildren, says, no, we should not make it easier for people to have bigger families if they can't afford them, while writer, broadcaster and mum of four, Claire Muldoon, says we should be supporting parents and children because it gets them out of poverty. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
David Mellor, so your view, in a nutshell, is if you cannot afford to have more than two children, you should stop at two children.
Yes, and I say this with great regret, because having just had my fourth grandchild last week, I wouldn't mind another 7 or 8, but the money isn't there.
So we shouldn't encourage people to have more than two children. But, Claire, of course, you have four children.
Yeah, I do.
And so you want the taxpayer to pay, what, for that extra two children,
Susanna,
in your case?
The framing of the question, the taxpayer, people that have more than two children, people that have less than two children on the child benefit are still taxpayers. Hello, wake up, smell the coffee. We're all taxpayers. This money has to come from somewhere. The reality is, when Osborne brought it in 2017, child poverty in this country absolutely increased. And that, for me, is not worth a thing. It's ridiculous. It's awful. It's abhorrent. And you cannot put a price on a child.
David Mellor, when you were in the Cabinet, you had a policy called Family Credit, which was there to help poorer families in work. And if they had 3 or 4 children, they got extra money for the third or fourth child. So were you wrong at the time?
Probably. Yes, probably. The thing is that it's really not possible to put provision of assistance for children who are not affordable within families, to put that above all the various pressures that there is on public expenditure. I mean,
but the reality is, David, you're only kicking the can down the road.
I know you talk a great deal, but can I just say a word or two? I think the problem is that we don't have the ability to fund this kind of expenditure at a time when, if you, Ed, as you might were facing up to the problems for the Ministry of Defence, which I always regarded as the least efficient way of spending public money when I was Chief Secretary. The reality is it's a totally transformed situation, and we can't put people having the self-indulgence to have more children than they can afford above the cost of actually keeping the country safe.
But if Boris Johnson has 4 kids, that's fine because he's rich. But if a
9.
family has 4 kids and they're poor, the kids are going to live in poverty.
I personally think it would be no bad thing if he hadn't had any children. So don't worry, I'm not in any hurry for a new generation of Johnsons.
OK, Claire, we invite people on this programme because we like them to talk a lot. So,
Thank you, Susanna.
So do go ahead. On that point, the government is about to spend billions more on defence. Does that irritate you because you think, well, there's lots and lots of children who are in poverty?
Not on that point.
Do you see it as a clash, or do you think the government should do both?
I think the government should do both, and the government are well within their means to find the money for it all, because who will they be there to defend? There'll be no one there if people aren't having children. This is quite egregious, and it's very pejorative to put people down for having children. It's an extra £17 a week, for heaven's sake. That's hardly going to make people breed like rabbits, is it? And the cut-off, the means-tested cut-off for this child benefit, the threshold is quite high. It's 50,000, moving up to 60,000.
Hang on, we're not talking about child benefit. Child benefit you are entitled to for every child. This is about the cap on whether you get extra universal credit or child tax credit.
The reality is they need it, because Osborne brought it in, as I said, in 2017, in order to put parents back into work, which is great. People need to work. The benefit of the children seeing their parents work, that discipline, the diligence, the dressing up and going out is great. Unfortunately, the reality is it didn't work.
David Mellor, there is an issue that Reform have picked up on, which is that the birth rate is declining. And Nigel Farage is actually, counterintuitively, in support of lifting the two-child benefit cap. You know, we're all getting older, and there's more people currently getting older, and that we're all going to need support from younger people.
The hundreds of thousands of people who come into this country who shouldn't be.
Right.
I mean, look at the increase.
So we should rely on the immigrant population to support the older people.
On the immigrant population. But the point is, there is no shortage of people who want to come into this country and work. In my view, there are far too many, and it's unsustainable.
But That's nothing to do with the birth rate.
I don't think. Well, obviously, it has something to do with the birth rate, because if people have to work, they can work because they were born here, or they can work because they come in here on whatever boat they choose. But the point is, I don't see why we are allowing people who can't afford children to have more of them as a priority over some of the other things that should take priority.
Look,
and you know, Ed, if you were Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you would have to make these tough decisions, and you'd be right, and it would be good if actually politicians were able to take tough decisions without turning them into party political.
Well, here's a tough decision. The welfare state was set up as a safety net to help prevent poverty, to enable people to go out to work, to enable better health for people. By removing this cap, it will open up the ability for people to have a better standard of life. And I'm sorry, especially when it affects children, David, I'm so for that.
Can I ask, though?
You're kicking the can down the road.
I can imagine that there are viewers saying, and in fact we've received messages from some of them this morning, they decided to cut their cloth according to their means. They decided to only have 2 children because they couldn't afford to have more, and they decided therefore not to depend on the state to support them. That this ultimately is a clash between individual responsibility and thinking that you can do whatever you want because the state will pick up the bill.
Exactly, but this control by the state is wrong in my view. It's morally wrong. And I think to use the myopic term of not looking into the future enough, you are merely kicking this problem down the line. Kids in poverty now are not being educated as highly as they ought to be. They will not be the taxpayers that we need them to be, and they won't be here.
Shall we find out what the government says? It is determined to bring down child poverty and will publish an ambitious child poverty strategy later this year to ensure that they deliver fully funded measures that tackle the structural and root causes of child poverty. Well, that doesn't say anything about the two-child benefit cap at all. So we asked you if you think taxpayers should be paying for people who have more kids, and just 12% of you said yes, and 88% of you said no. So it suggests that viewers are against lifting the two-child benefit cap.
But David, what will viewers think of a Labour government which stand back and says it's OK for child poverty to rise? Will they respect that?
Well, I don't see that the government, any government, whether left-wing, right-wing or whatever they are, has any choice. At the end of the day, you cannot allow your budget to be driven by people's desire to have children, whether or not they can afford them.
OK.